2 tips for choosing direct cremation services. If you have recently lost a loved one, making final arrangements may be one of the most difficult things you will ever be asked to do in this life. No matter how close the relationship is, if you have been entrusted with planning a funeral and cremation services as requested by your recently departed loved one, it will not be an easy task on a number of levels. Then again, you actually may be planning your own simple cremations to save your loved ones from the stress they would be subjected to. Other times, you may not really have anyone close enough to make those plans for you. Whether you are making your own arrangements or cremations for a loved one, here are 7 tips for choosing the right cremation services in keeping with personal beliefs and value systems. 1. Understand why cremation has been chosen. The very first thing you should do when planning a cremation for a loved one would be to understand why they wish to be cremated instead of buried. Some people simply abhor the idea of being buried and left to decay over a long period of time. While they know that they will not be aware of being buried, they still can't quite consider being locked in a box and buried. As illogical as it seems to anyone including themselves, they still refuse to be buried. Other times there are people who are truly concerned with environmental issues. They understand that natural resources are being plundered and that being buried in a metal casket isn't something conducive to conservation. Even if they could be buried in a biodegradable casket, it still takes up a great deal of space that simply isn't necessary. For this reason, they choose to be cremated, but even then, they want a biodegradable urn that will not harm the environment in any way. 2. Learn the various types of cremation services available. Once it has been determined that your loved one wished to be cremated, it is important to understand the various types of cremation services available. These would include traditional cremation with a funeral service, traditional cremation with a memorial service, direct cremation with body being donated to science. While it may seem as though there are very few differences between these choices, they can be huge in terms of making those final arrangements. For example, a traditional cremation with funeral services means that the body will be taken to a funeral home, laid out in a coffin for final respects, and then there will be a funeral service of one kind or another. Most often they are religious services in all faiths. This would mean a gathering of people for the funeral itself. Then, if the ashes are meant to be buried at a later date, those same people are invited to a second ceremony at the burial grounds in which the urn is placed underground with a marker or tombstone placed to mark the spot. A traditional cremation with a memorial service is often similar to one with a funeral service, but typically the memorial will take place after the body has been cremated and placed in an urn. Sometimes the memorial service is held at the time when the ashes are scattered or buried. The major difference here is that the body isn't typically laid out to allow for paying final respects. A direct cremation is when the body of your loved one is taken immediately to the crematorium where it will be cremated. From that point, the ashes are placed in an urn.